Lights, camera, action. Today we have the great veteran actor with us, John Shea, acted in over 91 feature films and television shows. I first got to know John Shea when I was a film student in 1982, when I saw him act in the feature film Missing, directed by the legendary director Costa Gravas and co-starring Sissy Spacek and Jack Lemmon. Little did I know that 16 years later I'd get the chance to work with this man who I admired on screen as a 20-year-old film student. And here I am today doing a podcast, Conversations with Charlie, with the great artist, John Shea. Welcome.
Charlie, really happy to be with you, man. You know, I'm a fan of yours too, as you know.
That's so nice. So, you know, we talked a lot before this about what makes being able to hang out with someone interesting, because that's what these podcasts are, you know. I mean, our conversation podcasts are a chance to spend time with someone in a way that really is not available, and it goes out to people who perhaps are interested in the film business, and also people who are aspiring to become filmmakers, and also those who are veterans and are old friends that want to see their old buddy talk on a show. And the audience is so wide and so interested. But I think we start with I think an important launching point, which for me, at least, is not early life, but rather Yale Drama School, and your experience at how your creative journey really began. I mean, in a sense, even though, of course, it began before that. So talk to me about the story of Yale Drama School and the period you were there under Robert Brustein, and I believe Meryl Streep was a classmate. I mean, this was a very fertile time to be at that program. And you had graduated Bates College, where you had done undergraduate work as a theater actor and otherwise. And we'll bounce around, but hit me up with this first. Let's start with it.
Look, man, at Bates, like the roads don't go from Lewiston, Maine to New York City. I mean, you can't actually get there psychologically. So one day I was sitting in the library and I read about a review in the New York Times about Yale Drama School students working at the Yale Rep. And I was like, yeah, what's that? And I wrote away for their catalog in the days before internet, and they sent it to me, and I drove, whatever it is, about 6-7 miles down in a snowstorm in January. I was the first person to audition that year out of 1,200 people that they auditioned. And I walked onto the stage and I did my serious piece, a piece of Shakespeare. I actually played Jimmy Porter, in Look Back in Anger, and I did that piece, and then I did a comic piece from Shakespeare. And then I was about to leave the stage, and they said, wait a minute, what about your improv? What's that? They said, well, we don't tell you about that. That's why it's called improv. So we want you to meet Steve, who's coming across the stage right now. So you and Steve are going to improv something. And I said, okay, Steve, what do you want to do? And he said, no, this is your audition, dude. I mean, I'm in the school. You tell me what you want. And I said, okay. They said, 15 seconds, Mr. Shea, 15. So I like, oh my God. All right, 2 guys, 2 brothers, the Wright brothers. It's Kitty Hawk. We're launching the first airplane. And we do this little improv, and I say, all right, Orville, on 3, I'll push you off, and good luck here, buddy. And boom, I go to push him. I say, I'll pull down on the propeller, and you pull up. And on 1, 2, and on 3, I do a full squat in the middle of a bare stage. We're just improvising, miming the whole thing. And my pants split, Charlie, up the crotch. I'm not wearing any underwear. And I am fully exposed to the universe and to the 7 people from the Yale Drama School who are auditioning me. And I look down, and they, of course, start laughing. But I hold on to the improv, and I sort of, like a duck, waddle across the stage with my hands over my crotch, and I push the plane off, and I'm, good luck, Orville, good luck, waving goodbye. And they go, all right, Mr. Shea, come down here. Do you have any questions? And I said, yeah. Do you have, costume department? Because my pants are, seriously split. So what I want to say is to every actor is that this is how my career started, like with a pratfall and a joke and a sight gag. Okay. And a year later, when they called me about 4 months later on my birthday in April, and said, you're in. When I got to the school in the fall, I said to Robert Brustein, who was the dean of the school, I said, I heard that you saw 1,200 people across this country. You picked 12. Why did you pick me? He said, because we laughed about you all the way across the country because that was the most ridiculous audition anyone's ever seen. And I said, that was it? Just the sight gag? And they said, no, you stayed in character. That was the test, So what I want to, if we're encouraging actors, young actors who might want to be seeing this, your podcast, I would say that, take anything that comes to you and try to just stay with it. That I think the secret here and the lesson I learned was that by just going with what destiny offered at that moment, I was, a hippie with worn out jeans, and I was going commando, no underwear, and bang, it just happened, by accident. But it turned out to be the key that led me into the school. And then I became an actor at the school, and I was cast in most of the leads in that first year. And honestly, but during that first year, I saw all the great minds that were around Yale at the time, and they were unavailable to the actors. So I said to Robert Brustein, I said, I got to quit. He said, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, well, look, there's, Ming Cho Lee, the greatest set designer at the Metropolitan Opera, teaching set design. I can't study with him. I can't study with Jerzy Kosinski teaching playwriting, or Arthur Penn, Sidney Lumet, George Roy Hill are teaching film acting over the. And he said, all right, you can't quit, but I'll tell you what, why don't you become a director? So in my second and third year, I became a director. And that was carte blanche. So the deal was that I worked in the cabaret with Joe Grafasi and Meryl Streep and Mark Lynn Baker and all these great people. But as a director, I was free, Charlie, to work with all these great people. And they were my mentors, and they inspired me, including Robert Brustein. I have to say, it was fantastic. And I had to work for him in the Rep.
But wasn't that also part of the shift that took place, that you got a chance to also become part of the program with Arthur Penn and Sidney Lumet as well, right? That shift also, because it allowed you to be also part of that. I guess what was you have to explain what it was. I'm curious.
Okay, so in the drama school, it was just pure drama. Okay, it's a theater, and in its purest form, studying all the great plays. But really, Robert Brustein and the deans before him and the deans that came after, it's about the purity of the art form. Okay, so the film was not considered to be a pure art form, and actors were not only discouraged, they were forbidden to work over in the art school, which was next door, where the film department was. So it wasn't connected in any way, psychologically, spiritually, in any way, with the drama school. So I trespassed. I had to sneak over there. And then once as an actor, but then once he made me a director, I was like, all right, now I could do it. And I did go over, and I got to work with Arthur Penn. Now, Arthur Penn was one of my great heroes, because Arthur Penn had directed Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah.
And Bonnie and Clyde changed my life. Yeah. Because I saw that, I was like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. I want to be on the screen. I want to work with guys like that, Yeah.
And then you acted in the theater. You were directing at Yale, and it was a number of years. You were there in the program, the full stream, before you moved to New York. What were the steps like going from Yale to acting in the theater? Because you went to act in the theater in New York from Yale, right?
Correct. But every once in a while, we'd have an emissary from the front lines, like a professional actor from New York who would be coming, or from London, who would come to work at the professional company at the Yale Rep. Remember, the Yale Drama School was a conservatory, a training school for the professional company, and we served apprenticeships there. And one of the guys that came in my third year was a young actor who's about 5 or 6 years older than me, and his name was Christopher Walken. And Chris Walken came to play Caligula. And I was the assistant director of Caligula. So I got
this is at the Yale Rep?
At the Yale Rep.
Great. Wow.
And he was starring as Caligula. And I got to hang out with him for a month and watch him create his performance of Caligula on stage at the Yale Rep, but in the rehearsal rooms. So it would just be the director, me, Chris, and somebody else, sometimes for 4 or 5 hours at a time, as he would slowly but surely hone this character and the stuff that he did. And then later, because I was also an actor, I was a spear carrier on stage with him through the whole run of the play. And so I stood literally with a spear with like a Roman costume on behind the emperor's throne, and I watched Chris Walken create that character. And this is a great play by the French writer Albert Camus. And so all I can tell you is that Chris Walken is a genius, and what he did completely inspired me. And he was the most generous actor to a young actor. All I can say is that he was another role model for me, because I saw what it took to be great. It took constant diligence, constant reading, constant rehearsal, constantly digging. If the director would suggest something, he'd try what the director suggested, but then he would go further than that. And he was never inhibited. He used his intuition to inform everything. And so when the director said, well, at a certain point, Chris, you are Caligula, mate. And the director was English. He said, you've got to kill your girlfriend, Chris. So it says in the script, you could stab her. You want to cut her throat, Chris. And Chris Walken was like, no, man, I don't want to cut her throat. That's been done before. I want to find a new way to do it. So one day in rehearsal, Chris Walken sat behind the woman who was playing his lover, right? A great English and Canadian actor named Nancy Wickwire. And she had a long, long blonde wig on. And he started braiding her wig, braiding it, loving her, caressing her, fondling her, kissing her neck, drinking a glass of wine. And slowly but surely, he took that braid that he made and he wrapped it around her neck. And he said, remember, Susonia, that you too must die. And he snapped her neck, and there was a crack sound that someone would make off stage, and the audience screamed as she twisted like this and convulsed and slipped out from between his legs and slid across the floor dead. And then Chris Walken walked like a crab backwards until he got a goblet of red wine, and then picked it up with his teeth and drank it like this, with the red wine running down his face and onto his white emperor's tunic like blood.
Love it.
And I saw the audience's reaction, like, oh my God, he is insane and he is great. And I thought, yeah, he is. And I know why. Okay. So that's my Chris Walken story. So from Yale, I went to New York on fire, both as an actor and a director, because I saw what was possible because of the great people that I met, Yeah.
And then your first opportunities in New York, when you came to New York, because you went straight to New York, were in the theater with Joe Papp's Public Theater and the Chelsea, right? And talk a little bit about the early moments for you in theater in New York.
Okay, I'll just say this again. I had good luck on my side. I had a kind of real lucky, fateful thing that happened, like ripping my pants, on the stage to get into drama school. And that was this. Yale, graduated 3 guys about 5 or 6 years before me, and they had started a theater company at the called the Chelsea Theater at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And the Chelsea Theater, along with the Public Theater, was the hottest theater in New York in those days.
So the Chelsea Theater was at BAM at that time, was the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And you did that where you ended up with Joe Papp, right? I'm sorry, you froze up with me a little bit there.
Yeah, I know you're freezing up with me a little bit too, but that's okay. Maybe it's cold somewhere. So when I was at the Chelsea Theater, my class at Yale was scouted by these guys who had graduated before me and started their own theater called the Chelsea. The head of that theater, the artistic director, was a guy named Robert Calfin. Robert Calfin hired me, because I was a young director, to be the assistant director on all of the plays at the Chelsea Theater, which was at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, right?
Right.
So one of the first plays I did was with Hal Prince. And I was the assistant director for Hal Prince and Leonard Bernstein on a production of Candide that they did. But then very shortly thereafter, I was reading opposite. I was auditioning the actors that were coming in to do a play called Dawn Song about the American Indians. And Calvin saw me reading with these actors, and he's like, dude, what are you doing in this directing program? You're an actor. And I said, no, Bob, I do both. And he said, well, you're fired. As my casting director, assistant director, I want you to read the script. Take this home tonight and tell me what you think of it. And he gave me a script called Yentl the Yeshiva Boy by Isaac Bashevis Singer. He had adapted it with a woman named Leah Naplin. And I came in the next day and I auditioned for him. And I auditioned with 500 other guys. And in the end, I got the part. And Tova Feldshuh played opposite me. This play opened off-Broadway at the Chelsea Theater. The New York Times came and raved about it. God love Clive Barnes, you know, and so did everybody else. And Cheryl Crawford, who had started the Actors Studio with Lee Strasberg, and the group theater with Harry, came to see the final performance and said, I want to take this show to Broadway. So a year later, about 6 months later, we opened on Broadway, and suddenly I was 26 years old and I was starring on Broadway in Yentl. And Yentl was a hit. It ran for a year. I won awards. Everybody came to see it. And then I was launched as a professional actor in New York.
Fantastic. And then what year are we at now at that point? Is this
1976?
76. So it's a number of years before the story that you told me that begins with the theater that I find absolutely fascinating as a segue, when you told me that you were cast into the film Missing because Costa Gravas saw you in the theater and actually never casted you in a casting session. He said you've already done the casting session. I think that's an outrageous story.
Well, Charlie, so I always stayed in New York because I was trained for the theater, you know, and I did a lot of plays off Broadway, on Broadway. And I had done a couple of theater film pieces at that point. But basically what happened, Costa Gravas flew in from Paris. Again, my good luck. Flew in from Paris to cast Missing at Universal Pictures. And when he arrived at JFK, he had a limousine, a car waiting for him. And in the back seat, you remember how the cars are, they always have the daily newspapers. There was the New York Times. Well, it happened to be the day after a play that I was starring in at the Manhattan Theater Club opened, a play called American Days by Stephen Polyakov. And all I can tell you is that there were 3 rave reviews, again. So he got to Universal and he said to the casting director, Walina Sita, I want to go see this young actor. You got all these reviews are amazing. So he went to see me that night at the Manhattan Theater Club. And the next day, Walina Sita called my agents at ICM and said, Costa Gravas wants to meet John Shea. So I went in and hung out with him. And he said, so you can have this part. I've got a new film I'm going to do. Jack Lemmon wasn't even cast yet. He said, but Sissy Spacek's going to play your wife, and you can have it under one condition. Universal had greenlit this picture. It was going to be Costa Gavras' first American film. He had won the Academy Award, as you know, for Z or Zed with Yves Montand. And Sid Sheinberg, who was the head of Universal Pictures, had seen Z, loved it, and thought that Costa Gavras would be the right guy to direct Missing. And so he hired him to write the screenplay. And so Costa Gravas and another writer later came in to tweak it a little bit, named Donald Stewart, but really it was Costa's script, right? Anyway, so he says to me, you have the part. You're going to play the guy that's missing. And Jack Lemmon wasn't cast in that part at that time yet, but Sissy Spacek, he said, is going to play your wife, and you got to come to Mexico City. But look, you can have this part under one condition, which is that you have not appeared in any other films. And I said, well, I have a problem with that. And he said, what's that? I said, I've done 3 films. And he said, tell me about those films. And I said, well, I did a biblical epic with Madeline Stowe. I played in a film called The Nativity. She played Mary, I played Joseph. He said, was that for television? I said, yes. He said, television films don't count. I said, okay, good. He said, what else have you done? I said, I just did a film in England with Helen Mirren, a film noir, a thriller called Hussy. And Helen Mirren and I star in this film. And he said, English films don't count.
No.
Okay. Right? He said, what's the third one? I said, I just did a film with Jill Clayburgh, Michael Douglas, and Charles Grodin, in which Jill Clayburgh dates 3 guys at the same time. It's called It's My Turn. And it was produced at Warner Brothers by Ray Stark. And he said, what happened with that one? That's Hollywood. And I said, Costa, I found out last week that they cut my character out of the film. He said, what? He said, yeah, Ray Stark told me that they tested the film and the audience said any woman who's sleeping with 3 guys at the same time is a slut.
That's fantastic.
And we got to lose one guy, so let's lose Shea. Yeah. So they cut me out of the film. And so he said, all right, so you got the part. And that's how I got missing.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I had told my family, my friends, my agents, Joe Papp, everybody, because I was doing a play at the Public Theater at the time. He let me go to Hollywood to go meet them out there. But all I can say, and to go shoot it, but I was crushed when I found out that they cut my character out. And this is another lesson for all your actors, directors out there. The things that seem the most crushing could be blessings in disguise. You know what I mean? I was cut out of the film and I thought, oh my, I must be horrible. But no, honestly, I believe that the universe was saving me for missing. And for Costa Gravas, who a month or so later showed up in New York and offered me that part. So, you know, that feeling where...
And the way he found you, I mean, he didn't have a plan to meet you. It just happened it happened organically. I mean, literally organically.
That's right. He just happened to show up the day after the play opened and he read the reviews.
It's nuts. I love the story. And then the stories of the film itself, we're going to jump around a little bit to some other stuff, but I want you to tell the story because I'm, you know, and I think anyone who studied film is a Costa Gravas fan, I hope, because of the incredible work that he did, it not on all of his films, but the way in which he set up you and Sissy Spacek in an apartment, I believe. Tell that story about Mexico City and how he set the stage for you to really to be husband and wife, but to be in, I guess, what would be sort of a kind of a dangerous feeling situation on some level, to feel like you were, because the film takes place in Chile, right?
Correct.
But
yeah.
Not in Mexico City. Yeah.
Yes, we couldn't go to Chile because Augusto Pinochet was still in power, and
Right.
we were on a hit list. And later we were on a hit list, and I've never been able to go to Chile. I was told by the CIA, you know, that my life would be at risk while Pinochet was in power. Now I could go. But I'll just say that at that time,
even in that era, you would be, when you did Missing, you were, it was obviously something that exposed their world. So yeah, you were persona non grata in that era. Yeah.
Correct. So anyway, we couldn't shoot in Chile. So Costa had shot a film called State of Siege in Chile. So he knew Santiago and Chile really well. So he was able to recreate it in Mexico. Anyway, we had to shoot the film in Mexico. We shot Mexico City for Santiago, and we shot Acapulco for Viña del Mar, which is where the coup in Chile was actually fomented. So anyway, Costa has written the screenplay. And so when we get down to Mexico City, it's just Sissy and Costa and I at this point. We go a month before we're going to start shooting. And he says, I want you to come and rehearse with me. So he said every day, and we got in a car, and he took us out to a neighborhood in the middle of Mexico City, which is, by the way, 30 million people. And it was this rough and tumble neighborhood, but it would be very much like the one that our characters would have lived in Santiago. And when we got to this house in the middle of this Mexican neighborhood, the set dressers had already been there and the prop people, it was completely dressed and ready to shoot, even though we were a month away. And he said, I want you and Sissy to come here every day for the next couple of weeks. I'm going to drop you off in the morning and I'm going to come back at night. And I want you to live the life as if you would live if you were really husband and wife. And if you were really young artists, which is what they were, trying to explore life in Mexico, in Chile. So we would, first thing, and then the car would drive away. And goodbye, Costa. And we would say, well, let's check the refrigerator, and there'd be some food, and we'd get the food the prop department had put in, but we're out of coffee. Let's go shopping, and we'd get to know slowly but surely the neighborhood. And at the end of every day, Costa Gravas would show up with the script supervisor, and he would say, "What did you do today? Tell me a story." And I'd say, "Well, Costa, we did this. We went to get groceries and we saw a woman, an old woman who was run over by a bus." He said, "Well, tell me about that." I said, "Well, the bus driver ran her over, and just to make sure she was dead, he then backed the bus over her intentionally to kill her." And Sissy burst into tears. But the people in the street seemed to agree with the bus driver that was a good thing for him to do, because he had 5 children and didn't want to get fired and lose his job. And the old lady that he ran over was an old woman. Her life was over. So it was like, welcome to Mexico. It was very, very interesting. And he said, okay, that story is very much like what it's like in Chile during the coup. Because remember, they killed 30,000 people in a soccer stadium there. They executed them against a firing squad. Okay, 30,000 people. And my character ended up being buried in a concrete wall. What happened was that he would set up improvisations with Sissy and I, and he would say, "Okay, John, Sissy," he'd say, "you go into the bedroom and you go pack your bags, because you're out of here. You don't want to stay a minute longer, and you want to go to the airport right now." And then he'd take me into the kitchen. He'd say, "John, make her favorite soup. Make her tell some jokes. You don't want her to go. You want to stay, because this is exciting. You're a young journalist as well, Harvard-trained journalist. So you got to find out what's going on." And so he would give us opposite intentions in our improvisation, and then we would improv for the next hour or two. And I have to say, Charlie, it was amazing. And then the script supervisor was taking notes in longhand, and then Costa would say, "Okay, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow. And let's go home." And we'd go home. We'd all have dinner. They'd drop us off in the morning. So this is the way the beginning of the film started. And when I said, "Costa, why are we doing this?" He said, "Because, John, I've never believed what I wrote when I was writing this in Paris. I knew that there was a real relationship between a husband and wife that the actors could help me create on screen. And that's exactly what you're doing here for me." And so that was his process. And it was a complete illumination for me as a young aspiring director, because obviously I was working with an Academy Award-winning director, and extremely conscientious and generous person. So I have to say Costa Gravas became, a godfather for me and a mentor for me in Hollywood, and still is.
So that experience of doing that was literally before principal photography began. Was that in conjunction with rehearsals, or did you go after that 2-week stint? Was that only a 2-week stint on top of rehearsals, or did you go right into shoot? What was his method? What was it like working? And this is an interesting story, because you were doing this as part of carving out what the relationship would be, and even the dialogue and the connection, and kind of creating a foundation and a building block. But there was a script and there was a narrative to follow that he was about to direct. Did he do that in addition to this?
Yeah, there was a great script. It's just for Costa, the beginning of the script didn't work. That is when the young couple got back together and realized that they were in danger. You know, he needed to correct those scenes, and the improvs that we, for those several weeks, allowed him to rewrite that section of the film.
Wow.
And it worked really well. After that point, we shot for 3 months, and then we spent 2 months in Mexico City, and we spent a month in Acapulco. And I have to say that even though I wasn't in the scenes, Costa Gravas took me under his wing and let me stay by him by the camera at all times.
Right.
So on the days when Jack Lemmon,
your character is gone very early on. When Jack shows up, you've gone missing, and you stayed with the production throughout that period to watch Costa work. Was that what you're saying? I'm asking.
Correct.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, I asked him, I said, Costa, do you mind if I stay? He said, no, you can't leave Mexico because I want you there are other scenes that I shot that are flashback scenes that were woven through the whole shooting of those in those 3 months,
of course,
including the scenes that we shot at the end in Acapulco. So there's no way that I could go, but on my days off, which were many, I spent my days on the set next to Costa, next to the A camera, and watched him direct.
Outrageous.
And then he introduced me. And then the other thing, excuse me for interrupting, is that because we were shooting in Mexico City, the film was being sent every day to Paris to be developed.
Right, he sent to a lab in Paris. How fascinating!
And instead of having dailies, we had weeklies, and then we would all go to the hotel in Mexico City, and we would sit there breathlessly waiting to see how it looked. And the whole cast were invited, and the crew. And we sat in a big conference room with a big screen set up and a projector, Charlie. And it wasn't Technicolor, it was, Pathé, somebody like that, right? Anyway,
well, there are a number of classic
it was
labs.
Amazing.
There are a number of classic labs in Paris that were standalone, independent labs that were not part of the big world of large brands. You know, Eclair was one. There were a number, LTC. There were labs that were based in Paris that had no other operation anywhere else except in the city of Paris. That's probably where he sent his stuff, I would guess.
That's right, and because he was used to their timers, right? So he would be on long telephone conversations with the lab, doing the color correction, all that stuff in the beginning. So we would get color-corrected dailies, which were really great. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then you told me a story about...
And then he let me sit in.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Then he let you sit in in the editing, or in the...
No, in the editing, yeah. And so, the old-fashioned with a Steenbeck and, cutting old-fashioned 35mm film, it was fantastic to learn how to do that. Yeah.
So did he cut in Paris?
In Mexico City.
Oh, he cut in Mexico City. So he cut in location. Okay, that's great. Which makes sense.
He did a rough cut. He cut while we were shooting.
Right, cut while you were shooting, and then the editor was on location with you throughout production, as should be, and then it wrapped. The editing room moved back home with him, I would guess. Yeah.
Correct.
Great.
Correct.
You told me a story about Jack in a car going from Mexico City to what was the desert? Acapulco. Yeah, it's Acapulco. This will sit with me for the rest of my life. So do tell. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have to say, Jack Lemmon also became like a Hollywood godfather to me, because even though we had no scenes together, he said, I want you to hang out with me through the whole film. And so he brought poker chips down from Hollywood. He loved to play poker and he loved to drink tequila. So every night he would have me and the other actors and the crew back to his hotel room, and we would play poker and drink tequila.
Wonderful.
And so finally, after Mexico City, he was the most generous guy that ever lived, Jack Lemmon. I'll tell you another story. One day he had all the actors who had ever played his sons on stage and in various films to his house in Beverly Hills to have dinner with his real son, Chris Lemmon, because he wanted his film and theater sons to meet his real son. And
that's fantastic.
we had a massive dinner party with about 15 guys, and it was fantastic.
Oh my God.
So Jack was just one of these great guys, and he was married to Felicia Farr, who was an excellent actress herself, and she was down there the whole time. And they had to drive from Mexico City with the driver over the mountains to Acapulco to start shooting. And one night, while they're driving over the mountains, the Sierra Madres, whatever they are, in the middle, going through a village, they hit something and they didn't know, and the driver got out. And Felicia started to get out of the car, and he said, "No, Senora, no, 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 no." And it turns out that the driver had hit a young girl and killed her in the car. And Jack got out of the car, and he told me the story. He said it was so horrible, and the family came rushing out. There were like 8 or 9 children, and the mother and the father, and the mother was crying. They lifted the little girl, and they carried her away. But the father went to the driver, and the driver said, "Señor, vene aquí." And he took him to the trunk, and he popped the trunk, and in the trunk was Jack's luggage, but also was an attaché case, which he popped open with the combination and handed the father of the young girl that had just been killed a stack of crisp American $100 bills. Jack estimated there was, like $5,000 or $10,000 in compensation. Something that you could never possibly compensate for, but to say, "I'm so sorry, there was an accident." She ran in front of the car. They're playing with the kids, and the father said, "Senor, God bless you and thank you. We will take care of my daughter in the church and give her a power. But this money, I want you to know, will help my family, for the next, many, many years." And we so appreciate it, because many people would drive through this village, hit my daughter, and keep on going.
Amazing stories. We could talk about that for the next several hours. But you had mentioned to me your experience with Madeline. Who was it? Madeline Stowe, I believe it was, in Nativity, and then also working with the iconic Helen Mirren in Hussey, which actually both come before Missing. Are there stories you wish to share there? I mean, we're going to jump around to different parts of your life, but those are two things, and I know that we're lingering a little long there because we're going to get to Lex Luther and all that other stuff. But let's do this early stuff first because it's so juicy.
Well, look, I'll just say that Madeline Stowe, as a young actress, we were the 2 American stars. All the other actors were English and from Spain, because we were shooting down in the southwest corner of Spain, where they shot The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and all the spaghetti, and living in this little Spanish town. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Cabo San Lucas? No. Anyway, it'll come to me in a second. But all I can tell you is that one night we were shooting. This is the kind of things that happen, and I want to tell your young actors as well that are watching. You're out there in the desert, and you're shooting at night, and there's a scene that the writer has written that a mountain lion attacks Joseph and Mary and their donkey at their campfire on their way to Bethlehem, where the baby's supposed to be born, in this kind of biblical epic, right? And so the question is, how do you get the mountain lion to attack you? And so they've flown a lion in from Madrid, and this lion sounds pretty ferocious. He's in a cage that they've got on the edge of the jungle. We can't, of the desert, or this little oasis. We can't really see it, but all I can tell you is that at one point there's a scream, blood-curdling scream, and the crew starts shinnying up all of the coconut palm trees, and Madeline is whisked away, and I'm told, run, because the lion has gotten loose, and he's actually coming to eat us. And so
This is
they
great.
say the problem is that they don't feed the lions because they want them to be ferocious, and I'm supposed to fight the lion with, you know, like a burning stick from the campfire and keep him at bay. But the lion is now loose, and this scene is going to have to wait until they capture the lion. So I say, how are you going to capture the lion? And they say, well, come with me and you'll watch us. And so the Spanish lion wranglers get a goat, a baby goat that they've brought along just in case they need this goat. And they put him in the back of a Land Rover. And they tie the goat to the back seat of the Land Rover, to the headrest, and they open the back of the Land Rover, and they all run. They tell me, run, run, run. And sure enough, out from the fringes of the oasis, from the dark, comes the mountain lion. This huge, like Bengal lion, goes bouncing through and jumps into the back of the Land Rover and starts killing this lamb. And the wranglers come and close the back of the door of the Land Rover, and all you can see, you can imagine a Disney cartoon of blood and fur and all kinds of stuff flying against this window. And they wait until everything calms down, and they open the back door, and the lion's just lying there like a house cat, and licking his lips and purring like he's the happiest animal in the world. And so they can leash him again and bring him to the set so I can do the scene with him with the fire. Anyway, this is the kind of things that happen on sets that you don't see very often, you don't hear about, but they're true, right? They're true. And the scene with Helen Mirren, look, Helen Mirren at that point, when I shot this film with her in 1980, was already a stage actress at the RSC, at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I had seen her in London when I was over there traveling, and I knew exactly who she was. She hadn't made a lot of films yet, but I knew that she was a really good stage actress, and she was, you know, like this great kind of up-and-coming leading lady. So, but I also knew that she was super sexy. And when I met her, I was I had heard that she was super sexy, but as a young woman, she was phenomenally sexy. And so I met her, you know, with the director. By the way, 3 guys in New York auditioned to star opposite her: Kevin Kline, Bill Hurt, William Hurt, and me. And I got the part. And I think I only got the part because I had a passport, you know, and I could be in London like a couple days later to start shooting. So anyway, I show up in London, and the director, Matthew Chapman, who's written the script, says, John, he says, I want you to meet Helen. Helen, this is John. He said, don't forget, Wednesday is the sex scene, John. Wednesday is the sex scene. And I go, the sex scene? Well, I don't remember a sex scene. And Helen said, oh, darling, oh, there's a sex scene. It's not called hussy for nothing, darling.
No.
So 2 days after I meet her, we show up in this massive loft down on Wapping High Street, you know, my character's loft. And all there is in the entire loft, in the middle of the floor, is a queen-size mattress. No pillows, no sheets, just a mattress. And he says, yes, John, that's where you're going to shag her, John. And I hope you know what you're doing, because, you know, I want this to look great, mate. You're going to be stalkers, he says to me. I go, stalkers? He goes, yeah, stalkers, John. Stock fucking naked, mate. Oh, no clothes, mate. Helen's getting in makeup now. You have to get in makeup. So anyway, I am so nervous. You know, this is during the rehearsal because we're shooting the next day. I'm so nervous. I can't sleep at all that night. I wake up. I take a 2-hour shower. I put on 9 layers of deodorant. I show up at the set early. Helen's nowhere. She finally breezes in. She goes to her dressing room. I'm in mine. And then she says to me, though, the night before, John, don't worry, mate. Don't worry. I've got the secret. I go, you've got a secret? She says, yes. I said, well, what's the secret? She said, well, it wouldn't be a secret if I told you. I'll tell you tomorrow, John. And so all night long, I'm thinking, what is Helen Mirren's secret to doing a nude sex scene, right? And so I'm like, oh, okay. So it's like, half an hour, please. Half an hour to places. Half hour, please. And then 15 minutes, please, and there's still no Helen. I'm ready to go. I've got a bathrobe on and nothing else. And finally, like 10 minutes, please, 10 minutes, I go knock on her dressing room door, which adjoins mine. And I say, Helen, it's John. Oh, John, come in, darling. Sit down. I said, well, Helen, in about 10 minutes, we're going to be rolling stalkers on the bed. She says, yes, ma'am. She said, I said, you had a secret. You want to share that secret? She says, yes, John, reach into my bag there. You're going to find something. It's long, it's hard, and pull it out. It might be cold. And so I reach into her bag next to her chair, and I pull out a bottle of red wine. A bottle of red. Now it's 7:30 in the morning in London, right? I've just been off the plane for a couple of days. But she says, well, I said, well, do you have a corkscrew? She said, John, this is your character's apartment. I would think that you would know where the corkscrew is, wouldn't you, mate? So I run into the kitchen. I grab a corkscrew. The director says, what are you doing? I said, leave us alone. We'll be out in a little while. And so we pop the cork, and I get 2 glasses, and we start drinking wine. And we have that bottle of wine together, sitting, Helen and I, in her dressing room. And we're laughing so hard we can barely see. And then we go out into the set, and she says, oh, wait, I forgot another little surprise. And I said, what's that? And she said, it's another bottle of wine, John. So we bring out the other bottle, and she cracks the cork, and the scene goes really well. And we shoot all day long. And if you ever saw the poster for this, which ended up, like on the billboards in Leicester Square, like a block long, there's the 2 of us lying in bed, and at the head of the bed, there's a bottle of wine.
Ah! This is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Now, there are a number of films after this that I want to chat with you about, but we have to kind of move along and move up the line. I mean, obviously Kennedy and Windy City before the TV stuff. Windy City is important, I feel, just because it was, unless I'm wrong, is that not your first time working with your buddy Army?
Army had seen Missing, and he had auditioned like lots of guys. Lots and lots and I mean hundreds of guys in LA.
And just to introduce, we're talking about Army and Bernstein, who is a director but also a producer. But on that, he was a director, correct?
He was the writer and the director. It was his first feature film. First writer and director. He later, did One from the Heart with Francis Ford Coppola, which he wrote, that Francis directed. He started Beacon Pictures. He's one of the most successful producers in Hollywood independent history. Yeah. He's produced 50 major feature films and, worked with every A-list actor in the world. But this was his feature film debut as a director. As a director and as the writer. And he had seen my performance in Missing, and so he called my agent and he offered me this part. And they reached me on the island where I still live, on Nantucket Island. And he said, John, I want you to come to Chicago. I'm excited to offer you this part. I read the script. I loved the script. I said, when do you want to shoot, Army? He's in LA, right? And he said, August. And I said, well, Army, I can't come in August. And he said, what do you mean you can't come? And I said, well, because the reason I love your script is because it's a story about a guy whose best friend is dying, and he rallies all the other friends around him to make his death like the best possible death, like all the dreams come true. And Kate Capshaw plays my girlfriend in it, and Josh Mostel plays my best friend who's dying. And so, but my best friend on Nantucket had just died in real life. And so I was in mourning and rallying all my friends around his family. So I was living the film that Army had written, which is why I wanted to.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to do his film.
And then,
but I didn't want to shoot it just then in August.
And is that when you introduced Army to come to Nantucket to visit you at that time, and he fell in love with the island?
Correct. He fell in love with the island. He stayed here. He had a spiritual experience on his birthday. He called Ned Tannen, who was the head of Warner Brothers, and he said, I think it was Ned. Anyway, he said, we got to push the film until October. and he spent the rest of the summer hanging out with me. I did a
Fantastic.
play after that. Yeah. With Sigourney Weaver, I did a play with Sigourney. He hung out with us in Williamstown. And anyway, so I love Army, and he and I now have been friends for all these years, and
Continue to be collaborators,
we
right?
yeah. That's another story. We had a feature film together that he produced and I wrote and directed. This film is called Gray Lady.
Gray Lady, yes.
And that's the one we talk about it down the line, but we're still friends and still working together.
Absolutely. So in the film Honeymoon, which I think was 1985, I looked at it in detail and I realized, wait a second, it said something I knew not at all of you. There was some aspect of it where you would perform in French language. Can you talk a little bit about Honeymoon and how that film came about? I know nothing about it. Tell me about the story about Honeymoon and about getting involved with that film in general and how it came about. And I don't know anything about it, so.
Yeah, Charlie, let me just say, because of Costa Gavras and that time that I spent with him in Paris, I had always loved French cinema. You know, I loved Godard, I loved the New Wave, I loved the auteur theories, I loved Truffaut, and so I just loved the French films. So I was offered suddenly the starring part in opposite one of the great French actresses at that time in the 1980s, whose name was Nathalie Baye.
B-A-Y-E. Oh, wonderful. Great actress, yeah.
Do you remember her from La Balance and The Return of Martin Guerre with Gérard Depardieu? She starred opposite him.
He was fantastic, yeah.
So she was, arguably one of the great actresses at that time. And so I was to play opposite her in a very film noir kind of love story. Sort of like the equivalent of playing with Helen Mirren in London, who was a great English actress. So I got to go to France. But the catch was that the director spoke no English whatsoever. His name was Patrick Jamin. They wanted me to help translate the script from French into English, and they wanted me to shoot it in what's called double version. That means double version. We would shoot every scene first in English and then in French. And so that meant that Nathalie Baye was going to have to shoot everything in English and French as well. So
wow.
So they asked me to shoot. So they offered me this job 6 months before we were going to start shooting, right? And they hired a coach for me. So I worked with a coach in New York and in Paris for 6 months before I started shooting, learning French, and specifically the French in the script. So I knew how to pronounce every word and what everything meant clearly, right?
Wow.
So that was a great experience for me. And
I grew up as a kid in another phone call coming in. Unbelievable. I grew up as a kid in Brussels, Belgium, and from 1972 to 1979, we came back to New York, age 10 to 17. And I went to movies growing up in Brussels, which was not a city where the French language cinema, since Brussels is a French language city, fully embraced only dubbed American and English language and English films, which was the sort of the standard for France, and not for Holland or the north of Belgium, where they subtitled everything, right? So I was used to seeing, when we arrived as kids in Brussels, the first thing my brother and I saw when we turned the television on was we were in my dad's apartment before we moved into a house, because my family relocated to Europe, and we were watching an episode of Get Smart on television. This is now 1972, and it was and all the episodes were all dubbed into French, and my brother and I, and we just couldn't stop laughing because they did dub, right? I mean, you could imagine what this is like. But not all of Europe will spend the money on dubbing, although certainly the French, the Italians, the Spanish, in certain parts of Europe where there would be where there was an industry for actors who would play like known actors. I mean, it's one of the cores of the film by Pedro Almodovar, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, where the male character is a language dubber. And I've worked a little bit in that world, and up in Canada and Quebec province, where there are actors that spend their careers playing specific people. Like there's one guy that plays Stallone and one guy that plays and all that, right? But this is double version. I mean, this is crazy. I never heard of the idea of getting in front of dubbing by acting in both languages. Is this something? I mean, I'm literally. I mean, not that I shouldn't say that I don't learn something every time I do a podcast, but I had never heard of doing a take by take version of a film, so that in the end there would be no dub version. You would actually be speaking the language, and there would be no dubbing. This is amazing.
I'll just say, Charlie, they told me later that they had planned to have a French actor come in and revoice me. That they call dubbing synchro, post-synchro, right?
Right.
For synchronization. But in the year that I spent in France working on this film, back and forth, flying back and forth, my French became good enough. They said, your character is an American who speaks French. You don't actually have to be French. So I'll tell you what, why don't you post-dub your entire performance? So I then spent a month at the studio Clignancourt, which is outside of Paris. The studio Clignancourt is famous for its dubbing stage. Mm-hmm. And I went in and I revoiced my entire performance in new, improved French.
Right, so you did your own
astonishing.
your own dubbing, ADR. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
I did. And then I toured France with Natalie and was on French talk shows, telling jokes in French. I mean, it was crazy. So I felt, and then, suddenly there's your picture on the Champs-Élysées. And honestly, I felt honored, like an honorary Frenchman. And, when I came back to Paris, to LA, to Hollywood, my agents barely watched it. Nobody cared. Who cared? Whoopi Goldberg. Because I was staying with her, in the room next to me at the Chateau Marmont. She said, "Where have you been?" I told her what I was doing. She said, "Oh my God, I want to see the film." I showed it to Whoopi Goldberg, and Whoopi Goldberg said, "This is fantastic." And she had screenings in Hollywood in honor of the film, and that's just who Whoopi is. Incredibly generous person. I love her for it.
Wonderful.
And Jack Lemmon came, and they're all, yeah. So anyway, the film, it was obviously an art house film. Nobody cared about it in America. It got a limited release. But in France, it's still known. And I actually walk down the street in Paris these days and people stop me. Yeah.
Wow. What an incredible thing. I mean, like I said, I expand my mind every time something like a story like that comes my way. Your life, New York, theater, film, the 80s, because we're talking generations, the 80s, the 90s. You hit the 90s, you're doing 93, you're doing there we go. This is going to be an epidemic with the phone calls. So the Lois and Clark, The Adventures of Superman is really a long stretch, really, right? In the early 93, you did that, and as your character Lex Luther, that became sort of an identifier. I mean, we all have, like, I think you even mentioned to me, people still, is that correct, stop you for that, or they did at one time, or right, that was we all become known and then reknown for something else, and right. So talk about Lex.
Do you remember in like People magazine, you'd always have like a middle name? It would be John Missing Shea, and it would be John Kennedy Shea, or John whatever. Then like Lex Luther became a new middle name for me. When they identify you in the fan magazines. So all I can say is that I had been working on stage a lot after a bunch of films, and I was doing things off Broadway. I did Rosmersholm, like an Ibsen tragedy.
Throughout the 80s.
Doing all these other plays. yeah, throughout the end of the 80s. And my son, Jake, was born, and I was living in Soho all those years. I lived in Soho for 25 years. So I was always a New York actor, but I realized I was losing out on, and I spent a year, doing Honeymoon and all these other foreign films. I went to Israel and I shot a film, two films back to back for 6 months in Israel, one with Kelly McGillis and another one with Eli Wallach. I played Israel's most famous spy in a film called The Impossible Spy. Anyway, but I was doing these things all over the world, but I wasn't making an impact in Hollywood. So I hired a new manager, and this manager was very smart. His name was Keith Addis, and his associate, Eli Selden. And they said, John, you got to come out here. You got to do something new in Hollywood because you're losing out these parts because, you're doing all these foreign films. So I said, all right. So I did go to Hollywood, and he sent me a script one day, Keith, and he said, they're having a problem over at Warner Brothers casting Lex Luther. Read this, tell me what you think. I read the script. I knew immediately what Lex Luther should be. And this is the truth. I said, he's got to look like Donald Trump, and he's got to think like Richard III. Because being a New Yorker, I knew that Donald Trump was like this young playboy, bon vivant, master of the universe type, right? Fine suits, fast cars, lots of women. But I also knew that Lex Luthor was something like a sociopath. And I had played Richard III, the great Shakespearean villain, on stage. And so all I can tell you is that I went over to Warner Brothers and I met with Leslie Moonves. Leslie Moonves was the president of Warner's Television. And I went to Leslie's office and he said, what do you got? And I said, well, I have an idea. He said, well, go ahead, show me. So it's just the two of us in his office. But I laid out this kind of interpretation in this long monologue that Lex Luthor had in the pilot. And he said, I like it. He said, he called his office in, and they all came in, the casting people, everybody else filled the office. I did it again. They were like, okay, we're going to ABC tomorrow. The next day I went to ABC, and there in the theater at ABC was Bob Iger. Bob Iger in those days was president of ABC, later to become president of Disney, and like a master of the universe in that world. So then it was Leslie and Bob Iger, and I did the audition again, and I got the part. That's all I can say, is that I had to audition for it, but I went in with a very clear idea. And I wore my best Armani suit. I looked like $1 million, but I fought like a maniac. And by the way, because I had, this is just a footnote here, Army, but Charlie, how they tie together. To do the character in Honeymoon opposite Natalie Bai, where my character, I wasn't sure. I knew he was mentally ill. I didn't know what his illness was. I entered myself into psychoanalysis in character at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And I went to the head of the abnormal psychology department, and I paid him to read the script. And then I would go into his office, and he psychoanalyzed the script and me as the character. And he said, you're not a psychopath, you're a sociopath. And he taught me the difference. And so I brought what I learned in doing Honeymoon to Lex Luther. And that's why I had so much fun doing it, because I knew I could do anything I wanted to do, because sociopaths aren't self-conscious about what they're doing at all. The only thing that sociopaths have is an appetite. They just need to devour, but they don't feel any remorse. They're on top of the world. They do everything with a big smile, right?
Yeah.
So anyway,
a fabulous description of the character.
So I had so much fun doing Lex Luthor, and it became a big hit. It was sold all over the world by Warner Brothers, and right, it was on ABC every Sunday night for 3 years. So I became a TV star, and that was kind of great because it just opened a lot more doors and led to other things.
Right, because a ton of television after that. A spoiler alert for me on this was today when I was sitting around in between things, I turned on the first 3 episodes of the show, and saw your early performances in the beginning of that show, and this is something that goes back to a time when I don't think I had my eyes on the show, and I was like, oh my God, this performance is outrageous. I mean, the character you play is so fantastic. It's that lovely sort of elegant evil, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
in a sense, right? Yeah.
And you know, I have to give credit to the writer again because you know I love writers. I really love them. And this was a woman named Deborah Joy Levine, and Deborah Joy Levine was she had an instinct for this, and she did something really original, which is that she turned this old comic book character into romantic comedy. Because you remember Terry Hatcher and Dean Cain were kind of great, but it was a love triangle too with Lex Luther, also in love with the Terry Hatcher character. So all I can tell you is that she brought an original spin to it that she kept going for, I think, 4 or 5 years. And hats off to her, hats off to Leslie Moonves and everybody who greenlit it. But and you know, they would let me in the writer's room, and I learned a lot about writing hanging out with them. And I'd say, you know, I have an idea for season 2, and they say, well, like what? And I pitched my ideas to them, and they ended up taking some of them and, you know, modifying them. But it was really fun hanging out with the writers, seeing how they did all this. You know?
Where was that series shot?
At Warner Brothers.
At Warner Brothers. So this was shot in Hollywood. Which was the series that took you to Toronto? Is that later on? In which one? You said you ended up living in Toronto at some point.
That was that was also produced by Warner Brothers. Oh, sorry, John. That was produced by Warner Brothers and Marvel Comics, but it was shot in Toronto, and that was called Mutant X. It was
Mutant X, which was later on, yeah.
It was the X-Men as that franchise, the Marvel franchise, shot as a television series.
So your years, you had a block of years in New York. Then when it came time to kind of dig in with the TV world, you relocated and moved your life to LA and your family. What were your moves? What was your geography? Because obviously when you were doing the Adventures of Superman, you were living in Los Angeles, no?
I never let go of my apartment in New York. I rented it out to a couple of different people, or I let people stay there. But I lived in Hollywood, you know, not in Hollywood, but in the West Side. And I lived there for, I don't know, for 25 years. I always had places there. For Mutant X, we shot for 3 years in Toronto. And so I did live up there during the season, 8 months a year shooting in Toronto. And then in the summers, I would, you know, do other things.
Right. And Nantucket was always an in and out theme in your life, I guess, until you've made it work, because you live there today, of course.
Nantucket was always a place for like spiritual retreat. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Nantucket was just a place for spiritual retreat.
And today you run the theater company there as the director of the Nantucket Theater Company, and you continue to make your entire life there since you did A Great Lady, which is a good segue actually to talk about your life and your instinct in 1998 to take a what would be your first shot at film directing with Southie, correct?
Yes, Charlie. You know, so you remember that's, you're good to go? Yeah.
Good to go.
Okay, yeah. You remember that story that I told you about the drama school where I actually graduated as a director? I actually kind of a double major, acting and directing, but there was this part of me that was laying dormant for 18 years as I was making movies around the world and shooting and being on stage as an actor, just acting, which was the directing side of me, right? And but I had gone to see Martin Scorsese because I wanted to be in Goodfellas. And Martin Scorsese said, John, you're not going to be in Goodfellas, okay? You're Irish and you're not Italian. So do me a favor, get out of my office and go tell your own stories. He said, the Irish are supposed to be such great storytellers. There hasn't been a good Irish-American filmmaker since John Ford. So go make your own stories. And And so I thought about what he said, and then I met a guy in New York named Daniel Egan, a Franciscan friar in the late '80s, and he was a guy who had a story, and I started learning how to be a screenwriter with the idea of directing his story one day. And it turns out that John Cassavetes and Howard Koch Jr. and Fred Zinnemann and all these guys had also wanted to tell his story, but nobody ever had a chance. Unfortunately, John Cassavetes got cancer and died. Fred was too busy. Howard Koch, all these other guys. So anyway, the rights came to me. And so I went to Hollywood in the early 90s. While I was acting in various films, I was studying screenwriting. And I wanted to direct this guy's story because it's such a great story. But what happened was in 1997 or 96, these young writers came to me and said, hey, would you direct our film? We have a film set in Boston. So they gave me the script that later became Southie. The script, and there was one guy in particular, Jimmy Cummings, and his writing partner, Dave McLaughlin. They were 25 years old, but they had grown up in South Boston, which was the world of Whitey Bulger and the Irish mob. And they had written a story that they were looking for a director, and they gave it to me to say, what do you think? I read it, and I said, look, I love this setting and your dialogue and all this stuff, but the story needs some work. Let me work on the story, and then I'll give you an answer. It took me a year, Charlie, but the whole time I was shooting Lex Luther and flying back and forth, because remember, I was living in Manhattan and commuting to Warner Brothers every single week for the first year. I put 30,000 miles in the air, and I wrote the script based on the script that they gave me. I rewrote it, okay? And, it just needed work. That's all I can tell you, structuring. So that became Southie, and I directed Southie, and and Donnie Wahlberg starred in it, and Rose McGowan, and Amanda Peet, and Ann Mira, and Lawrence Tierney plays the Whitey Bulger character, and that's another whole story. But it was an amazing experience working with everybody in South Boston. We were the first film, so Matt Damon and those guys came to our wrap party and Ben Affleck, because they were about to shoot a film, and so I said, well, meet my crew, And so they took our crew and they made Good Will Hunting. And amazing, of course, which is a fantastic, amazing, right, great, right? So all I can say is that I loved directing that. We sold it. We won the Seattle Film Festival. We sold it to Lionsgate. We represented the United States at the Montreal Film Festival. We sold it to Lionsgate, and it's still playing out there in the world. So then I thought, now that was the warm-up, and I could do this film about this Franciscan that's set in New York when the mafia brought heroin out of Harlem into Manhattan, and this guy went to war. But then Army Bernstein came along, my buddy from Windy City and Beacon, and he said, John, what if we make like a thriller set in a resort in the off season? And I said, Nantucket. He said, yeah, John, you live here. There has never been another feature film shot here, a major feature film. I'll produce it. We'll make a movie. I said, all right, let's do it. So 10 years later, Charlie, 10 years later, we finally released that film. It took a long time. I won't bore your audience with what took place, but let's just say that in the end, I believe that the universe protected us from making a film that wasn't ready until it was finally ready. And all the delays that we had, a global financial meltdown, all these things, losing all of the financing, it all came back. And when it came back, the script was really ready to make. Eric Dane stars in this, and Eric Dane just texted me a little while ago.
And this is a shot of us on the set outside of the
Charlie,
house.
because you...
No.
Oh, you got that.
It's a shot of Andre, and I'm
standing with Andre Barkovy.
And I'm the fat guy in the middle. But now I'm not fat anymore. But I was very fat then.
Charlie. So let me just say one thing. So you and I connected on Southie because technically we shot Southie, as you know, on 35 millimeter.
35, yeah.
Michael Butler was the original DP, and Alan Baker who was his protege. Alan Baker's first film, Michael Butler, famous for a lot of great films that we could talk about. But all the film was sent to you, and you took care of us. I think it was a third of our budget. You know, we had a low budget independent film. And a
Before
third of it, I
digital
think, went
capture,
to the film stock and
was the
development
line
and all that
item.
stuff.
It was the closest cost to being above the line when independent films were made, because there was a huge amount of money to spend on stock processing and printing, and then all the finishing. So,
but you took care of, yeah. Anyway, but you took care of us, Charlie, and you made it look great on low budget, and you did a lot of favors to a lot of independent filmmakers in New York at the time.
And then that continued on Great Lady when we put in editing rooms and a daily
behalf of us
in Nantucket. Yeah, on Great Lady many years later, and yes.
And then we did Great Lady, yeah. And that's Andrei Barkoviak, the great cinematographer, you know,
an old friend and a lovely man.
We love. And a great director, you know, all these films. He just shot a film in Shanghai. So all I can say is that we were lucky to work with you again. You know,
and then the Dan Egan story lives on.
And now the Dan Egan story is like what I'm looking forward to next. Honestly.
Very exciting, and a lot of twists and turns to the script as well, right? I mean, you were able to actually talk to him and record hours of time with him, right? Because he passed away at what year was
it? He passed away in 2000. He was 84 years old, but I spent 10 years hanging out with him, so I got to know him really well. And I tape recorded many of our conversations for over a year, and then I would go with. You know, and I'd say, wait, where did that take place? And he'd say, well, come on, John, I'll show you. And we'd run outside, and he'd take me all over Greenwich Village. And so slowly but surely, I learned about screenwriting. Again, this great managers that I had in LA made sure that I was given a stack of the best scripts by the best writers every single year, all the Academy Award winning and Academy Award nominated scripts. And I would read them and study them, and I got to know who all the great writers were, and I learned a lot from reading other people's scripts. You know?
Absolutely. And in your career as a rhythm from Lex Luther in '93 all the way up to the deep into the 2000s, 2012, 13, 14, 15, the television world became sort of thematic for you because it provided regular opportunities and such great and interesting characters to play, right? I mean, you know, I'm a big fan of narrative episodic television, and I think that, you know, there are not camps. It's three arenas. You know, you have feature narrative, you have episodic television, and you have, of course, you know, you personally have theater, which is beautiful, right? And you're able to embrace all of them and bring your art to all of them, and that's sort of what you've done with your life, which is to be able to have a run that includes both and that continues for you to constantly push to do both. And then to go ahead and direct a movie again, you know, and continue to do what you do. What I'm interested in knowing is, you went to Catholic school in Springfield, Massachusetts, and were an athlete and on the debate team, and were obviously an athletic, vibrant young man. But what did you have a feeling when you were a high school student or a younger man that this career was was there any inkling at the time? When did it all ignite?
Charlie, I want to say just two things. First, to address something before I answer that question, is that the theater has been the constant through line. And I have to say, it's something that Army Bernstein always said to me. He said, John, look at the life of Bergman. And Bergman, I have to say, is one of my heroes, the great Swedish director. And because remember, Bergman lived on a little island, right? And he always worked in the theater. He worked in the theater until the day he died. And the theater fed him, and the theater gave him a chance to explore. The theater, he met all these great actors, and then he put them in his movies. And so I'm still connected to a theater where I served my apprenticeship back in 1968. It's called the Theater Workshop of Nantucket. It's a professional company. I'm now the artistic director emeritus, but I produced 40 productions here, and I do Orson Welles' Moby Dick every year here for the last 10 years. I play Ahab. I direct this production in the Whaling Museum, and hopefully one day, Charlie, you'll come under the skeleton of a 60-foot sperm whale. But I have 100 people in my company, and with Justin, the guy who took my day-to-day job, we just keep the art alive. And what this does is that when I go to make a movie like Grey Lady, I was able to draw on shooting on Nantucket, our big theater company, so that I could bring, like Bergman did, a sense of truth and reality to the smallest part. Or like Fellini, all these characters who were my heroes, Costa Gravas, the smallest part, the extra in the corner, you want them to be telling the truth, right? And so you have to get to know a place. But like I know Nantucket, these actors all here told the truth. So anyway, to answer your question, in Springfield, I had no idea about the theater. There were no theaters in Springfield that I ever saw. I went to Catholic school. It was great, but I was a young, wild kid. I played sports, and I was on the debate team, and I have to say I love debating. Debating became a great preparation for acting for me because I got used to speaking in front of people, and also learning about both sides of a subject matter or a story. So there's the good guy, but there's also the bad guy. And there's, like in debating, there's always the people who are, affirmative and negative. So you learn both sides of any given story. But it wasn't until I got to Bates that I discovered the theater. And Charlie, that's maybe the last little bit. Is there another little coincidence? So I was playing football at Bates. I was there on a football and debating scholarship, but I hurt my knee really badly and I couldn't play. So the head of the team said, look, you're useless on the field, but I know you got a good fake ID. Go buy the beer for the game tonight, after the game. So I went over to the debate room to get my fake ID. And a woman who was sitting there at a table with a bunch of people said, Mr. Shea, what are you doing? And I couldn't tell her that I was getting my fake ID. So she said, come here, sit down, read this. And at the end of this reading of whatever it was, a couple hours later, she said, all right, you've got the part. We start rehearsal on Monday morning. And this was a 6-foot woman in her 80s with white hair named Lavinia Schaefer. And she cast me in my first play. I said, what was this? She said, that was a play, Mr. Shea, by William Shakespeare. It's called Much Ado About Nothing. And congratulations, you're playing the lead, Benedict. And I did. And I had to give up football, but I discovered that the theater was even more fun than football.
Wow.
Instead of a coach, you had a director. Instead of a locker room, you had a dressing room. Yeah, it was fun. I got to sword fight and kiss the girl and speak Shakespearean poetry, and it changed my life. So I changed my major and I became an actor. And that's the great thing about mentors, right? That did you have a mentor that inspired you at some point, Charlie?
Absolutely. He was a still photographer. He's still a photographer, but and a psychology professor. Because when I was at Clark, we had self-designed majors. So my major was in the study of dreams, and I had a still photography professor who had built an experimental time-lapse rig over people sleeping with electrodes attached to polygraphs and electrodes attached to their body to measure their brain activity during REM sleep. And this guy was also a great artist and still photographer, and he was like my visual arts mentor with my psychology professor, and then Ray Monroe for the theater because I acted. So he was my theater mentor. I didn't continue on with acting, although I in some ways I wish I would have. But they were my leaders, and as a visual artist, I went directly out of college into production and worked in film production, and then got involved in post. But I'm by origin I was really never meant to work in a lab, although I did. But I started that way, and I think, it's sort of life's what happens when you're making plans, right? I mean, you don't know what's gonna happen, and your story is that story. You ran into it was a happy accident, right? I mean, essentially,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah, yeah.
and that to me is that's the magic of what takes place. It's the same thing that happened in my own career in post and moving to New York and doing all the things that I've done with my career in that arena, and then now kind of returning back to the creative team again and starting a new leg. But it's it's these happy accidents and these things that happen that take us somewhere. I mean, I also look at my own life as having been a film projectionist in an old movie theater in Somerville, Massachusetts, the Davis Square Theater, where we would show 4 films a night. And I was a film history student, so there I was kind of continuing in that and then working in production. But there is a linear path, and there is a passion, there is a love, there is a soul, and somehow that water flows, right? And for you, a knee injury in football made it possible for you to all of a sudden dive headfirst into something that I didn't know that you hadn't done before. I wasn't sure. That's why I was asking about Springfield and Bates. So you didn't act before that, before Bates.
No, but I grew up in a really wonderful home. My mother and father were fantastic. My dad was an educator, a teacher, and a coach. And basically, they just said, God gives each of us gifts, and we just got to figure out what those gifts are. We got to work use those gifts to make the world a better place. It was as simple as that.
And your father was not only a professor, but ultimately would become the head of the Freiburg Academy in Maine, right? Was he? How did that all? What were the generations of time? He was Freiburg Academy in Maine when you were born in North Conway, and then obviously you moved to Springfield. But he was an educator, and was he a sports coach as well? What was that? What was your early life like?
Yeah, yeah. So my dad was a young guy. He was never the headmaster there because when he went to Bates before me. He had fought the Germans in World War II. He had fought his way across France, got to the Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge, right? I mean, he was a World War II first wave veteran. If he ended up in Bastogne in Belgium, where the Battle of the Bulge was fought. So these are guys that my father-in-law on my ex-wife's side was in the first wave at Normandy. These guys are different people. Every day they wake up is magical. The way they start their lives after having served in World War II. Every day is a beautiful day, right? Because you're embarking on a journey of having lived through something that was total horror, right?
That's right. Guys saved their lives. They saved other guys' lives. And when they came back to America, they realized, oh my God, how lucky we are to live in this country. And so they just dedicated themselves, that whole generation of guys, to
Right.
living a good life and doing the right thing. And so my dad set a good example for me. But when I told him that I wanted to be an actor, he said, "What are you talking about?" Nobody had ever been anything creative in our family. So I said, "Well, why don't you come up to Bates with Mom and come see the play?" So they came to see Much Ado About Nothing, and he said, "Okay, you can do whatever you want." So anyway, I was very lucky to have a supportive family, and I'm sure you did too. That allowed you to become the person that you are.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Was your dad? Yeah?
That's the same thing. No interest in themselves in the theater. My mom was a journalist. My father was a metal trader. But he was not an athlete. But I mean, I was an athlete and acted, and he was always whatever I wanted to do. If I wanted to be a visual artist, it was wide open for me. I was not given a challenge to do something other than what I was passionate about. That's a beautiful thing. And I think that the beginning of a journey that leads to, I guess, where we are today and all the zigs and zags along the way. I think it's the great, it's really the great message for an artist journey, a creative journey, a life journey, right?
Yes. And Charlie, if I had some advice for your young directors or writers or actors, I would say that they should learn about business. At some point, if they're still in school, take a business class, a business course, or talk to people who are in business. Find out about business, how the world works, how money works. Because I didn't study anything about business at Bates. I didn't study any business at Yale. I didn't know anything about business in, working in the theater or in film. But slowly but surely, I had to learn about business, because if you want to make movies, you have to understand money, and then you're going to have to raise money. So and if you're going to raise money, that means that you're dealing with investors. And if you're dealing with investors, that means that you're dealing with people who are really smart and very successful, don't want to lose their money, but they're willing to listen to what you have to say. But you have to know what you're talking about, understand things that you never really wanted to understand. And you have to become multidimensional, I think, if you want to survive and adapt and have a career that extends beyond your good looks. You see oftentimes young women particularly who are, because of the way Hollywood has historically not been writing roles for them past a certain age, that the smart young actresses now, once they have that power, they're learning about business, they're creating their own production companies, they're developing films and projects on their own, and they're creating opportunities for other young actors and directors, and they're mentoring people, right? And so I think that that's the way of the world now. I think the rules of Hollywood are changing because of the way we have so many outlets and so many platforms. But some things don't change. Being true to yourself, writing, directing, knowing about everything, but how to be a producer. Because if you want to be an independent filmmaker, you gotta actually get behind it. You have to create a budget. You have to write with money in mind. You have to figure out. Susan, who taught me this? Sidney Lumet. So let's go back to the beginning. Sidney Lumet, in his course at the Yale Film School, was not about production. It was about how to do budgets. And I'd say, well, Sidney, what do you mean? And he'd say, well, and he would bring in budgets. Remember, he shot 15, 20 films in New York City. He said, John, or to the class, why do you think they keep hiring me? And we said, well, you tell it because you're great. He goes, no, because I'm smart. And this is how I'm smart. He said, I'll do a budget. And I know that I can and I'm going to work really hard to figure out this budget. I know I can make this film for $6 million, but I'm going to tell them, that is the studio, it's going to cost me $7 million. And I know that I can shoot this thing in 25 days, but I'm going to say it's going to take me 30 days. So here's the deal. I come in on budget, under budget, and on time. And so I'm a hero to the studios, to the investors, to the networks, and to my friends who trust me with their money, because I'm going to deliver what I promised I would deliver. I'm not going to waste their money. And so it was a valuable lesson for me as a 24-year-old guy, right? It's what I do now. I pay attention to the budgets. And if I'm writing, if I'm directing, I want to make sure that our investors are paid back their money and everybody wins. Studio wins, the investors win, the actors win, everybody wins. Right? You
Absolutely. No, it's incredible what you bring up. 100%. My career having littered through the way it has, because I had to deal with huge post-production budgets for $100 million movies, $20 million movies, $1.5 million movies. I was constantly faced with having to shape the goals in post-production for feature filmmakers and episodic television. And because I was on the receiving side of that whole chunk of that, and what I do today, the opposing side, I'm the client and post-supervising, co-producing, I got to learn all of the business side of equity and debt and tax credits and all the things that we have to learn about in order to structure a deal that will have a footprint that is possible to recoup, and also to work with people and to be able to explain what the risk is and what the comps are and what the market is like. And yeah, you do have to learn about, with a great line producer, hopefully, how many days it's going to take to physically shoot something and how to be efficient location to location to get it done. I think in the case of Sidney Lumet, who I got a chance to work with quite a number of times towards the end of his life, specifically on one movie, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. And the crew used to have a bit of a holler about Sidney at Rap, because he insisted upon basically having an 8-hour day. I mean, and no one was used to not being sort of tortured, right? To work 14 hours on getting yet another call. There we go. So, it was, and he also did things very efficiently in single takes, and he knew how many pages he had to get through, and he was ironclad in being efficient and understanding the business aspect of what he had to creatively do and what he could be patient for and what he couldn't. So he was both a director and a great, artist, but also someone that understood that time costs money and hours of production and setups cost money. So everything you say is correct. He's like, he was that rare combination of someone that understood that people were paying bills and that running over needlessly was not responsible, right? And that, I guess, I mean, on some level, we're just going to say, God damn it, that's so rare, that's known. But on the flip side, when we get a chance to be around people who are mindful towards that in the film industry, we see that promise being kept, and we see what Sidney described, right? That what you described, especially, is that everybody cares, right? Everybody cares about those involved. The people that paid for the film to be made with their equity, whether it was a studio or individual investors. You're never not thinking of them. It's not just that they gave the money and you don't care that they make it back. You do, and you build a plan for that to happen, and then on and on, and the cycle of being able to do the work that we do, and also being good to each other, because I mean, this is a collaborative business, and we work with artists, cinematographers, editors, production designers, composers, visual effects artists, and construction people, and all of the people that work on a set and then ultimately in post. It's a hell of a big team, and we create a family out of that team, don't we, in the end, right? And I think about, when Robert Altman, when I worked with him on a number of projects at the end of his life, and the people, I never got to know him extremely well, but at least I knew the stories of the dinner table and people all coming together at the end of a day of shooting, because I knew the actors and the people that worked with him. And that was the ensemble, the community, the warmth and the love that made something possible, and then his own techniques of miking everyone and all of that. But at the end of the day, this energy is what makes great work, just like the story you tell of Costa Gravas and all the things that you absorbed coming into your life as a director and as an actor. So yes, the message is learn every piece, and don't just turn the switch off, and realize that if you're a collaborator, that, like you said, what's the last thing that the artists learn? And I think it's the last thing that you just mentioned, which is business, right? Because people decide that, what do I need to know that? That's why I have that guy. But no, that's not it. It's almost like if you were an actor and you weren't interested in what the cinematographer did, or what the set designer did, or what the other people did on the job, when you would ultimately want to become a director, which you have, you would want to know what it is to be the captain, and then if you're going to be the director, know what it is to be responsible with someone else's money, and how, and also what the structure of a deal would be that would be win-win for everybody that's involved, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure how you ended your last thing. It broke up a little bit, but I agree with everything you just said. It's not completely true. And you've had a lot more experience with business and running Technicolor and doing all the posts, and now your whole new world in post-production is, you obviously you understand, and your work with producers and line producers and studios and networks. I'm a neophyte in this world, but I do understand some essentials, and I'm glad we touched on them because they're not taught necessarily in undergraduate school and in drama schools and in film schools. And I think that if they're not taught, you got to find out the truth on your own, and just start hanging around the set all the time. That was the greatest thing for me, honestly, in all the films that I've made, is that the directors were always that everything you just talked about, Charlie. Everybody would always have dinner and hang out, and I would sit next to a guy and say, "Well, what are you doing on the set?" He said, "Well, I'm the production accountant." I said, "Well, what do you do?" As a young guy, and they'd say, "Well, I have to keep track of all the money," or "I'm the prop buyer," or "I'm the wing painter," or "I'm the whatever everybody does. But the more you know, the better you are as an actor, director, writer, producer, for sure, right?
Unquestionably.
Just because
Unquestionably.
everybody's got a story. Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I think we're coming to a good place to close, but I'm gonna encapsulate a little bit of this in something where we think about the tools and how they've changed, digital from film, digital post-production. The greatest tool that we have that costs the least amount of money is the pen, right? Where it all begins, or typewriter, or ultimately now laptop. It's the script. It's the script, marking up the script, rewriting the script. And unfortunately in our business in film, well, not unfortunately, I should actually say now, fortunately, some people have said, well, Jesus, everything's become so damn democratized because you can call yourself a filmmaker by buying equipment and owning an Adobe Premiere editing system or Avid system at home, and all of a sudden you're a filmmaker. And I'm like, I don't think so. But you are a content creator. You are an experimenter. It does mimic the great things that the guys from the French New Wave and the Verite cameramen who went from film to digital capture. I mean, they all prayed for the day that materials were not what would be the cost, but the actual work itself. And when you describe Southie and we sent our film to the lab, I'm like, yeah. And everybody sort of was like, wow, when we moved to digital capture, all of a sudden that went away. And then other costs crept in, and the craft didn't become less complicated. It's still complicated. But the beauty is we live in an environment that's a very collaborative one, and a lot of people have to learn their craft and learn it well to execute a great film, right? I mean, and great ensembles of artists in each department make for a great film, and then a great leader, a great writer, great director then leads that army forward, right? And it's remarkable when you think about it, because it's such an overwhelming task to herd and put together all of these people. So much more complicated than being at home and being an author of a book or a playwright that stages something for the theater and then never actually interacts with the ensemble. It's you go from the script to the vision, and you see the vision in the script. I mean, you have to have in order to work in our business, you have to have certainly a desire to want to understand the mechanics of business, but also want to understand the mechanics of relationships, collaboration, and what creates great art, right? And I think, your relationships that you've had and the people that you've worked with and what you've brought to the table creates great art, right?
Well, yeah, we're all the sum of everybody who's come before us and everybody that we've interacted with, everybody who taught us, everybody we ever worked with. So I feel like they've all given me something, all the leading ladies, all the co-stars, all the guys, all the directors, everybody, they left so many gifts, right? So, but in the end, Charlie, I swear, yeah, business, all that stuff, but it's really in the end, what's going to make the film business continue to be great are the stories that have yet to be told, because it's the stories that inspired you as a young guy that wanted to be a projectionist, and you would go into the theater and you'd have all your reels and you put them up and you knew what you were doing. You were on opening Pandora's box, and the minute you hit switch and that light would come on and that image would be projected on the screen, people are transported into a dream world. And that's that same dream world that I felt when I was a young kid, and everybody feels. And that's why I think that, what we're doing is going to help save this world. We're going to keep telling stories that are going to entertain people, inspire people, educate people. They're going to make them laugh. They're going to make them cry. They're going to do for other people what they did for us, right? And we just keep telling stories.
Right? And I want to, and as a send-off, and I think this is the moment, because we talked a little bit about it in our last jam session when I was on the island. As a movie lover, I mean, this podcast is taking place during a pandemic, so without us mentioning that the world has changed would not be correct. I mean, we're in a world where cinema has taken as we are. I don't even have mine on. I love it, but it's here. But I mean, the reality is, what's going to happen to movie theaters? And what you said to me first of all made me happy, because I want to be happy about the thing that I love, right? But you drive into Union Square in New York, which I do on a regular basis, going in and out of the city and coming from where I come from, and I pass by the Regal Cinema and I see closed when it was supposed to be open, and I realize I don't know when that chain theater is going to be open. And every independent cinema, the Angelica, the Metrograph, the Film Forum, they're all boarded up. I'm like, oh my God, like, are we coming back? When is the sun going to shine again? And there are so many people that said, oh, forget about it. The world's been taken over by streaming. But I want to end on a happy note with John Shea right now and talk about the future and the day that this all dies down and cinema comes back, and your prediction for the future. And this is where I want to end this episode.
All right, Charlie, I have a feeling that there's going to be, you know how everything in life goes in cycles. The moon goes in cycles. The sea, the tide goes in, the tide goes out. I believe in the book of changes, everything. So what's happening, I believe globally, I mean cosmically, galactically, is that we're preparing for a new awakening. I think that this pandemic is going to change the way people think about things, and it's giving all the writers and all the filmmakers a chance to write all these scripts, Charlie. And some of them are going to be so great that they're going to demand to be seen on the big screen. I'm telling you. And that there's going to be a hunger for people to get back together the way we used to gather together in the caves when the storytellers would do the puppet shows again with the fire in the, in the cold at night 100,000 years ago. And I think we're going to come back stronger than ever, Charlie. I do. Now, yes, there's going to be some changes. And certainly we've seen with the Zoom thing that you and I are doing that this is a new way for us to communicate. But I believe that there's going to be the desire to get together as a community and share a common vision the way we do only in a movie theater, not at home on our television screen. To gasp, to cry, to laugh together, to be transported together into another dimension, which is only the movies can do, only the live theater can do. And when they come back, we want to be ready for them, man. And I hope you and I are working together.
Oh, absolutely, we will be. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. And on that note, I want to end with at a time like this, at a time that we're all at home, waiting for this madness to someday pass. What you just said is a bit of sunlight in our day, and I know for everybody that works in our industry, we all pray for the day that we get to be in a movie palace again, and watch with full Dolby Atmos and Dolby stereo sound and all of the possibilities for cinema viewing in a large audience once again, because it's gone, and but it's neither forgotten nor has it gone away. And I wish to end this episode with the idea: cinema is the light at the end of the tunnel. And thank you so much, John Shea, for joining me today. This is the longest podcast I've done yet. I knew it would be with you. I love you with all my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie. It was my great honor and pleasure to be with you today. I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.